Okay, so we don't really know yet if the girls' stuff works, due to a few reasons. One, it's just hard to get studies funded where you look at that level, where you can get that kind of evidence you need. And girls' programs tend to not stick around for very long. So OJJDP has a girls' study group, and I have their website at the end if you want to go look at it if you haven't seen it. But they looked at 61 programs. They just kind of looked at all of the different, all those different compendiums that you look at for programs and whatever else they could find. And only 17 had even had any type of evaluation. And of those, none met criteria for effective, but largely because there's just not enough evidence. And over a third of those programs are no longer operating just because of sustainability. So it makes it really hard to actually look at, whether these are working.
Yeah, even oftentimes I've seen with evaluations of programs, rarely do they break up outcomes by girls and boys in generalized juvenile justice.
I need to go back and look. I think multidimensional treatment foster care did a randomized control trial specifically looking at girls and found that it was good for girls. But it wasn't an adaptation, it was just the program as is.
Right.
I don't know that FFT and MST have done that. I was going to ask Josh, but he's not here.
I don't think they've done that.
Specifically, I don't think. So obviously more rigorous evaluation of the programs and evaluation of the program components too. Like you were talking about, teasing apart some of those things. What really needs to happen. And another challenge of this too is a lot of the gender responsive programming is occurring at a structural level in terms of correctional facilities and their policies and stuff. And that, talk about a challenge in just getting an intervention program going to actually have detention or correctional facilities randomized and be doing drastically different things. Really tough.
Why would we expect a program done just in detention or a secure facility would have any impact really when a young woman left? That she would be so prepared to address all of these issues in her real world without the practice and the concurrent kind of in vivo experience. There may be some effects, but I would think that they would be mitigated.
Yeah, in terms of the girls' individual level outcomes.
Yeah.
Maybe you could look at if they go to shelter care versus secure care, do they experience lower rates of anxiety but in terms of their actual long-term functioning,
just what we know about how people change.
Yeah.
They need some practice using those skills, and practice in the facility may in fact improve the way they relate in the facility, but unless they can practice with their boyfriends and their moms and with other people, I just think that the effects are mitigated at best.
And I think you're highlighting kind of one of that tension we talked about, where a lot of the people I think who are driving gender responsive practice are doing it because they feel like the justice system is re-traumatizing girls. They're not as concerned about they want them, but do they go off in the world and have better lives? They're just the justice system is re-traumatizing these girls.
Yeah.
It needs to stop.
They're just trying to mitigate the deleterious effects of the system that they're overseeing.
And I think and there's a real benefit in reducing that traumatic experience. Just sort of putting yourself in. So okay, I'm 6 months in this facility, and will my life be more or less miserable? Preferably less miserable. But what impact that has later on?
That's the challenge.
Yeah, but it's like in hospitals. People have come to recognize you want to make a nicer environment. You want to get people to talk to you and make it more comfortable. And it makes the stay better.
Yeah.
Does it change someone's bad habits when they leave of smoking, or what got them to be hospitalized for the procedure?
Right. Yeah, and I think the good news is that OJJDP is bumped up funding. I think there's been some kind of grant mechanism for girls study the last few years, and other people are paying attention to it, but it's tough because all these political issues around why should we fund it and worried about legal ramifications of different practice, and it's hard to get it going. So this is one of the projects. This is so I'm funded through GJAC to do this study of girls process groups. So there's little pockets around Washington State, and Washington State does not have any type of state policy, definitely no legislation, no statutory requirements for really paying attention to girls in any sort of consistent way. So there's just kind of these pockets around the state that are doing this. I think I may actually have that later on. I should have switched these slides. But the idea is we're hypothesizing that when, and these are all probation level, that when probation engages girls in these groups, that it'll increase, the hypothesis is that it increases engagement overall in the justice process, and that you actually see them now participating in other court-based programming at a higher level of engagement, and that then you would see better outcomes overall. That's the hypothesis. The challenge is going to be no one really does these in the same way, so it's going to be really hard to actually create a treatment and control group. And AOC is going to work with us in giving us the data, the risk assessment, so we can match, as well as the recidivism data. I'm not exactly sure how that's going to sort of pan out and look yet. The other big part of it, though, is simply describing what Washington State is doing and doing these semi-structured interviews with group leaders around what they feel are important elements of group treatment with girls. And so we will combine that with the literature and make some recommendations around group practice with girls. If anything, it would be anybody who's leading a group with girls should have some training group there.
I was going to say, are these officers we talked to earlier, or are these like different?
Some are trained counselors, and some are just probation officers. And I don't know what their level of training is on this stuff. The other study that we're doing is a class analysis of girl offender types. So we're taking that core risk assessment and just looking at this idea of girls, there being within group variation. How do they look in terms of their risks and needs if you broke them out in classes? And then how does that actually match to offending patterns? And the idea is that we can make some recommendations for screening based on what we find in terms of kind of classes of youth. So policy level. So the national level, this has definitely been gaining in, increasing importance or awareness amongst different professional organizations around gender responsive practice. The JJDPA, which is Juvenile Justice League Prevention Act of 1992, the reauthorization 92 required that all states applying for federal dollars examine their systems for gender bias. So in Washington State, that money flows through the GJAC, the State Advisory Group, which is changing its name. And so GJAC has funded, like for example, they funded Powerful Voices, they funded some girls' circle training, and they're funding this analysis. So they're in compliance with that, but we don't have like a state policy. So here's some kind of model states. Again, this comes from Ann's visit. So the PACE centers, those are really known as the kind of gold standard of the people go down there to Florida, get trained in gender responsive practice. It's a sustainable funding mechanism as a prevention program through their juvenile justice budget. And the PACE centers are alternative therapeutic schools. And they just provide the girls with a lot of intervention and treatment and support. In Utah, they have the Adolescent Female Advocacy Network, and they have intervention guidelines, and they have a full-time girl offender specialist who goes around all the different jurisdictions and talks with them about their programming and their policies for girls. In California, I don't believe there's a state level, but they do have strategic planning groups in different counties, and again, that's where they're kind of getting on the girls' court bandwagon. And in Texas, in Bexar County, they have the Crossroads program, and again, it's similar to kind of a treatment program, drug court, and this is where they've actually redistributed funds to support that. And there's other states doing good stuff, but this is what came out of her assessment. And this is just what I was explaining. So King, Pierce, Benfring, Klickitat Island, and one is Snohomish have some girl stuff going on. And this is the Justice for Girls Coalition of Washington State. So this is a group that started in response to a request from the Human Services Committee for a work session on girls in the juvenile justice system like 3 years ago, maybe. Mary Lou Dickerson was chairing it. And then after that, the presenters continue to meet to how can we promote gender responsive programming. It involves JRA and representatives from the courts and GJAC, and the purpose just to expand expertise in gender responsive specific programming for girls in the juvenile justice system, influencing areas in policy, program, and system culture. And the event that we're working on right now is tentatively called Beyond Pink Walls, a call to action. And it's going to be an event. Couldn't decide on should we call it a summit, a symposium, a conference? So it's just an event. And the idea is to have, JPCs, administrators, detention managers from across the state, ideally, come together to talk about gender-responsive practice, to provide some ideas of what they could do, but to really have it be a work session in which people decide what they want to do for their reports, and there's some follow-up. The keynote speaker will be Leslie Briner. So she just came in from California to head up youth care because they're doing a prostitution initiative in King County, and apparently she's a really great speaker and should be wonderful. So the email is justiceforgirls.y@gmail.com. We have a newsletter that just went out, and we're going to be trying to get those out about 4 times a year. And these are just some other really good websites that kind of have all this literature and all this background on the movement and what people are trying to do with this and moving forward. So, yeah. Any other questions or anything? I think that's probably it.
That's great.